Hi guys, my name's Marcio. We're now going to start the first class in our Blueprint course. Now this is going to be our introductory lesson. Here we'll talk all about the basic concepts of blueprints and essentially what they are, okay? Well, Unreal Engine uses C++ programming language. You may or may not have heard of that. This is a well-known language term when it comes to programming. And it started being used in around about 1980, and it's been evolving widely through different sectors. Now, including in this amazing tool, Unreal Engine. And we can do so many things with this, some unimaginable things, really. Here in Unreal Engine, I want to show you a project that I've been working on. I've set it up with the use of C++, just so that you can have an idea of what we're talking about in practice. Now, the goal of this course is to be practical, okay, and less theory, but showing you how things are done and created using practical examples, we believe will really help you. This will make sure it's not too tedious, okay? Now, if we try to explain everything item by item, each tool, what it is, I'm sure you'll be pretty bored too. So what I've done here is I've created a very simple file. And what's in this is basically a template using the C++ method. Now let me just open up the character. And this is going to be a character you'll become familiar with over time. It's the first person character. Now, since it's in C++, it also opens up this Visual Studio application, which is a tool that's full of different types of commands. So what is C++? Well, it's basically text just like this, full of different lines of commands, and it's identified by the software and then it's executed or put into action. So this is a very simple example of C++ with the use of a character, or it takes effect on the character. So everything here that makes up our character is all written down in this text. Now, for each object, each blueprint in Unreal Engine, there is a code that is specific to text, just like this. Even if it's textures, all the way to assets and models, everything has some line of code. One interesting point that we'll address about the blueprint here is this area, okay? This double slash. And we see there's some text on the side, isn't there? This is a classic aspect of programming, which is the comment. Now here it has no coding functionality per se, but it is actually just commenting on what comes prior or ahead. For instance, when this bit here in green and the Visual Studio itself changes its color, it changes from green, there's different reds as well in there. It just means something different. So when it's green, it's commenting. And here it's commenting to itself, the programmer who created it. It sets up this comment to explain what's being done so that you can look at it and understand what's taking place below. So clearly there's lots of information here with different commands, and you could really get lost if you're not too careful. For example, it says I'm creating a camera component here. So in this command line, in this command group, all of this area here is creating a camera, which is basically what we do in the editor, which is we click and we drag the camera, don't we, into our scene. So what happens here is it's created this information and it's commented and told us what it's going to be doing, stored it in the engine later on. But basically it translates this into a command. So for someone who's never seen programming, it appears quite complex, doesn't it? You may be looking at this and thinking, wow, there's so many variables, so many different commands, coordinates, and it might seem really quite confusing. So what's behind the idea of blueprints? Well, a blueprint was created as a form to make programming a lot easier. And how does it do that? Well, it doesn't use text language like we're looking at here, but it uses visual language. which is based around nodes. So the idea of Blueprint really is to translate all of this into images. So it makes it a lot easier to work with. Instead of having to memorize or type all this information out in words, we can translate all of this into a node. Okay? As an example, a blueprint I have here is one that we're going to be working with later on in the course. But just to give you an idea, this is a sample blueprint. Okay? Now, each one of these squares is what we call a node. What does that mean? Well, it means that this part translates into an image what's being written here. So obviously we have quite a few things here, but this part here, this structure, rather than seeing it in text, we seeing it as a blueprint. Now, there are other features that we want to customize in our project that can also be done by Blueprint. So this is an example of a door rotation, and it's quite a simple setup. The character basically touches a spot or an area, and then it calls in the character and it executes an action. Here we can see a comment visually, the one I've mentioned earlier. You remember the slashes that create a comment, the camera component, for example? Well, that's equivalent to creating a window around our nose that describe what it is. So this doesn't play a program role, and it won't change anything in terms of executing things in Unreal, but it helps us to see visually what the nodes within the comment are actually doing. So picture this: you create a project, you save a blueprint, and suppose you don't work on it for maybe about 2 months or so. And then you go back to the project, and if you don't leave a comment, then you have to go through all the nodes and try and work out, well, what is it that I was trying to set up? However, if you were able to comment it and you come back to it after a while, you can just take a quick glance and go, okay, that's for the door rotation. It just makes everything so much easier to follow, to remember and understand. And it's really important that we keep things organized visually this way, especially using blueprints. It helps us and anyone else who works on the project. Clearly then, the more visually organized it is, the better it is going to be for our workflow, particularly in our project. So, what can we say in summary? Well, Blueprint can really help us to visually understand what's going on. And not just us, but all those who may work on the project too. You can just click and drag pins from one place to another. You can create routines, calculations, all of this so that you can customize your project and create effects, movements, camera, lighting effects, and much more. Unreal Engine brings endless possibilities in terms of blueprints. Now, obviously, if we think about creating a game, especially a large one, then our blueprints are going to become even more complex. However, in our case, we're not talking about games, are we? We're talking about creating routines to create interactions within ArcViz. So Blueprint is 100% practical and easy to utilize. So Blueprint is basically a visual way of seeing C++, and it can be a really helpful tool to use so that everyone can stay on board. It's really useful too for those who don't have much programming knowledge. So that's it for this class. Let's now move on to the next lesson.